There's definitely a blues influence that's paramount with this particular project. I was a small kid. I was a late bloomer. For those of us that were like, well, where do I sit in the universe? You know, what's my thing? What's my jam? For me, it was hearing rock and roll and being like, oh, well, there we go. Say what you will to me. There's a bit of a contrast with the lyric, where the lyric is. The lyric to that was inspired by artists we've lost, Gojira. 5 minutes later, there they are. It was just magnificent. Made my year, honestly. Yeah, when you listen to the music, it definitely has almost this anthemic quality. Everything you hear guitar-wise is all analog, but you can see there's an owl there, which is from that last solo record, The Ides of March. I'm still guilty of seeing shiny new objects going, oh, I like that. I knew of Devin for years, incredibly articulate and brilliant musician, and wow, I would love to get to tour with him at some point. That's one of the beautiful things about being an artist, is that you can hopefully leave something behind.
Primordial Radio.
Hey, what's happening? This is Myles Kennedy. You're on Primordial Radio. There's definitely a blues influence. I think that's paramount with this particular project, is that it still has those elements of the blues. And, that could be, you can look at that as somewhat Southern rock. It definitely stems from that. And so, yeah, that opening riff is definitely, it's kind of a calm response, that's right out of the blues playbook, and then it kicks into the heavier riff. Live, we were always a trio, but on the records, I would always take advantage of the multi-track aspect, and so I would add all these different parts. I'd play the lap steel, the mandolin, or banjo, or whatever, and then trying to recreate that live was somewhat of a challenge when you're only a three-piece, right? So then the goal here was like, well, let's simplify how we're arranging these tunes and approach it how we're going to do it live anyways, because inevitably we take the songs that were kind of had this, however you want to articulate the way it was recorded. It was definitely more sonic flavors with those other instruments, but to simplify it, because you're a three-piece, you just rock it out. And I remember our drum tech was like, I like these arrangements. Well, have you ever thought of recording these songs the way you play them live? I'm like, well, what if we just make a record, write a record exactly how it's going to be played live to the best of our abilities. Oh yeah, I was bullied, but I think not just because I was a rock fan, but also because I was a small kid. I was a late bloomer, so I didn't really fit in with the athletic types. I wasn't quite smart enough to be an academic. I tried my best there, but I was just trying to find an outlet, and that ended up being rock and roll, music. And so, yeah, when we were talking about the video and the theme of the video and all that, we thought it would be cool to integrate that element that so many of us experience. I think that's part of why music is such a it becomes so many young people's salvation, because they don't know where else to go to find their identity. If they can't fit in these other things that are kind of, as far as what are it's like their channel's already made for them. Like if you're good at sports, they're gonna embrace you in the school with that. Or if you're good at, you're good at math or whatever, you're gonna find that. But for those of us that were like, well, where do I sit in the universe? What's my thing? What's my jam? And then for me, it was hearing rock and roll and being like, oh, well, there we go. And I discovered a little late, it was Van Halen and Led Zeppelin. And by that point, Van Halen, when I heard them, it was like, I was probably 12 or 13, and they'd already been around for 5 years. And Zeppelin had been around for like 12 years, 13 years at that point. That was my saving grace. And then I discovered Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and Metallica, and just I wanted a heavy, for a while there was like the heavier the better, the faster the better. And so for me, hearing Metallica was like, oh man, that was badass. I remember I would watch that video with my buddy. Well, actually with Zia, the guy who plays drums on this record. We grew up together. And so that was their first video. They never did it. They wouldn't do video. And I remember watching this thing called The Headbangers Ball. And that video came on, and we were like, this is cool. This is dark. And then when it hits that part you're talking about, we're like, yes. Yeah, it's Mr. Downside. It's kind of as far as the lyric goes, it's addressed to me, like working on trying not to look at the glass being half empty and more half full. And I've gotten a lot better at it as I've gotten older. In fact, I've dramatically been able to improve that outlook on life. But early on, when you're a late bloomer and you can't keep all your buddies, maybe you would develop this tendency to be a bit of a pessimist. But yeah, that's the narrative of that song. Well, interestingly enough, where I live in a place called Spokane, Washington, and our weather is very similar to this part of the world. So I think that particular, what probably inspired that overall feel. I have no idea to some degree because it was written late at night and it might have been during the winter when I wrote it. But it was some altered tuning I was messing around with, and I just stumbled onto that chord progression and was like, wow, I really like that. But it didn't fit the record. When I came up with it, I was working on a record called Year of the Tiger, and it just didn't, it didn't sit with any of those songs. And so I set it aside, and I always knew it was something I really liked, partially because of what you said. It just has this kind of uplifting, yet there's a bit of a contrast with the lyric, where the lyric is. The lyric is melancholy and really deals with the impermanence of life and whatnot, that things are always changing, and we lose the ones we loved, and situations change. It's just it's that dynamic. But yeah, when you listen to the music, it definitely has almost this anthemic quality. Everything you hear guitar wise is all analog. I'm not, now a lot of guys are using digital setups, and they tour with digital setups that basically emulate, amplifiers. I'm still very old school. I want to hear those vacuum tubes doing their thing. There's just something that, it's comfort for me. It's what I know. It's what I've known for decades as a guitar player. So yeah, I don't intend on changing anytime soon. Although I'm sure, our management whatnot would love it, because we could save money on freight if I didn't want to ship my big amps around. Yeah, it's a trick. Yeah, we found this artist online. His name is RZA. I believe it's RZA Pecker. And we just really liked his style, and we thought it would be really cool for a round cover. So we asked him if there was a way of, if we could integrate things from my previous records, like images and things from my life, just as Easter eggs throughout the image, a very busy image, to kind of tell my story. And he was totally down with it. So he did a brilliant job. But you can see there's an owl there, which is from that last solo record, The Ides of March. There's a door, which is from the first Mayfield 4 record. That was my first major label band. And there's a tiger skeleton from Year of the Tiger. So yeah, it just kind of tells the story. Well, that would be nice. That's Muddy Waters. I mean, that's one of the guys, right? So I appreciate hearing that. But I do love the blues. I was turned on to it really through Zeppelin as a kid. I think how a lot of us were turned on, my generation anyways. Then I had an aunt that sent me a B.B. King cassette, and then B.B. King, and then discovered John Lee Hooker a few years later, and Robert Johnson. And yeah, so a lot of that music, though I don't consider myself a blues artist, I definitely take a lot from it and try and integrate it into what I do as a rock artist. Yeah, there are some really great guys out there. And then you have, more of these modern blues, guitar blues virtuosos like Joe Bonamassa, who are trying to do their best to expose these artists, which I really appreciate, and trying to shine a light on their importance. But yeah, have I wanted to do that in the past? Absolutely. I would love to do that at some point, because then it's kind of selfish, but that way I could sit on the side of the stage and listen and learn something every night. I think to some degree that's very, very true. yeah, the and I'm fine with that. I feel like as long as it doesn't completely go away, and the blues hasn't gone away, it's still alive and kicking. You just have pockets that are keeping it alive, and I think it's going to be the same with rock and roll, and it's continuing to evolve. That's a really important thing, to see bands continue to reinvent it. If you're just playing the same thing over and over, that I feel like that runs the risk of something becoming obsolete, because then the next generations might not accept it. And that was part of what happened with the blues. You had bands like a band like the Rolling Stones, and all they were trying to do was expose, this part of the world, London and the UK to the blues. And then through that process, then they kind of discovered their own thing and they started writing on their own, but they were still, they kind of turned it into their own deal. Right. And then Zeppelin, there was another big one. Right. And now it's the same thing. You have these younger bands taking what they grew up listening to, and I think that's what'll help keep it alive in the long run. Elvis is our producer, Michael Baskette. It's been his studio for years. Now it's moved. Well, initially it was up in Virginia, and then he moved and I guess you could say rebuilt it in Orlando, not far from where like Mark and Flip and the Alter Bridge guys live. But yeah, since we use Elvis all the time and we just love what he does, that's the studio du jour. Because it literally is a home. He basically kicked his family out of the house they lived in and then turned the entire thing into a studio. So it's not like a sterile studio environment. It's perfect because there are guitars everywhere, and it's the ultimate musician, create, like, I wouldn't say something that will inspire you. But then, my bedroom's just at the end of the house, and I can just disappear when I want to get a nap. Yeah, lyrics are the most important thing for me. And it's the thing I probably focus on the most. And the lyric to that was inspired by artists we've lost, the true greats who inspired so many of us. And I, as I like to say, we're all ultimately standing on the shoulders of giants. So paying tribute to them, and in the chorus really takes into account that these incredible songs they created and performances that are documented forever will live on. They've since passed, but those songs will continue to resonate in our hearts. And I feel like that's one of the beautiful things about being an artist, is that you can hopefully leave something behind. Yeah, that song is kind of inspired by where I'm at right now in life, where I'm trying. Now the key word is trying here. Trying to really kind of minimalize things, not be as beholden to accumulating more stuff, and the idea that any sort of consumerism is being recognized, and that a lot of times it's just you're looking for the next dopamine rush, you're looking for that next high, and then you realize after you have it for a while, like, I'm bored with this. Well, I don't need this. It's just cluttering up my house. So yeah, that's a part of the inspiration there. Now, with that said, I still get guilty of, seeing shiny new objects going, oh, I like that. That's, so, but then it's always like, you really don't need it. So stop this. Yeah, stop. The big thing is like clothes. So that's like, and that's one thing. It's like the worst investment ever. Like, because like clothes, when you buy it, and then what are you going to do with it? So I become I kind of have the things that I need, and what I'll do is I'll box them up, and then and my wife, she's like, you're going to reuse that eventually, aren't you? I'm like, absolutely. And so after like 10 or 20 years, I'll pull the box out and I'll start wearing this again, even though it's totally out of style. Like, it smells weird and everything, but I'm like, I can't throw it away because it's just like, it's wasteful. So if you see me wearing like something that you would have seen in the early 2000s, you'll know I probably got it out of the box. I would say occasionally I get a hankering for something, detuned and heavy and aggressive. I mean, my go-to for years has been really like Gojira. That's kind of like when I heard them back in 2011 at a festival, and I just kind of became a convert at that point. I heard a rumbling. Somebody reached out and said, "Hey, I heard a rumor that Gojira's playing this opening ceremony." I'm like, all right. So I sat down, and 5 minutes later, there they are, and it was just magnificent. It was incredible. So in fact, the other day I was in Paris, and I actually went to the building where they were, and I took pictures like a fanboy. Oh, this is where Joe was sitting, and Marty played drums right there. And yeah, you know what? I'm just so happy for those guys, because not only are they an incredible band artistically and musically, but they're incredible human beings. Like, if you've ever met them, they're just warm, wonderful souls. And so you're rooting for them. You want them to be the guys that are the torchbearers. And for me, I looked at that because it's such a mainstream event. I think to some degree, it's kind of along the lines of what it must have been like when people saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan show for the first time. That was such a thing, and it exposed so many people to this band that had such an influence on culture. And I kind of feel the same way with what that was. Is there a bunch of kids watching the opening ceremony? It's just like, what is that? And it hopefully in a few years they'll start rocking. It made my year, honestly. It really did. Yeah, Dead to Rights. So I have this little notepad thing, and I just write down song lyric ideas. I'll hear somebody say something, and I'll write it. So it's just hundreds and hundreds, just so that when I'm writing songs, I have something to pull from. And I heard that phrase, Dead to Rights, and I thought that's cool, and it's about being caught red-handed, and I thought, well, man, there's any number of ways I can spin that one in a song. So yeah, that's what the lyric is about. And then musically, it's inspired by a friend that we toured with back in the day from Canada. They're called Big Rack. So that's really the sound of that song. As I was tracking it, I wrote Ian Thornley, kind of the mastermind in that band. And I said, just so you know, there's a song coming out that's a total tip of the hat to you. So, don't think I'm trying to rip you off. I'm just paying tribute to you, brother. I love you. I have not seen him perform acoustically, so I'm very excited about this. I knew of Devin for years. I live in the Pacific Northwest. He lives in Vancouver, so it's all kind of the same thing. So I've heard about him, but also, when he started playing with Steve Vai back in the early 90s, that was my first introduction. It really wasn't until the Lightwork record came out a few years ago that he really got on my radar. And I was just that's one of my favorite records in the last 5 years. And so I met him. He was touring with Dream Theater last year, or maybe it was the year before. And I met him after the show, and we hit it off. And I really liked the guy. I just thought he's incredibly articulate and intelligent. He's a brilliant musician. And wow, I would love to get to tour with him at some point. So yeah, I was really surprised that he was down with doing this tour. And I think he's going to regret it in the end, because he's going to be like, oh, there's Myles again bugging me, fanboying out. It does. It's great. And I hope they do more of it. Somewhat selfishly, I say that just because it allows me to do this sort of thing, and I really love getting to make these records and tour them. So yeah, it's great for them. It's great for all the people who didn't get to see that band perform, and they had all those songs that, were massive hits back in the day. So yeah, I hope they do more. No, it's a collection of songs. I did that on the first 2 solo records, where there definitely is a theme and kind of it's a concept. Whereas this one is just, I wanted 10 separate tracks. So How the Story Ends was inspired by a film called Speak No Evil. And it's about the idea of not speaking up for yourself in the ramifications of that, and that's something I have to work on in my own life. And I'm a people pleaser to a fault sometimes. So it's a song to remind me to, stand up for what I believe in and don't do everything just because everybody wants me to. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you. You have a great day.
Primordial Radio.